Medical innovation starts with medical discussion. Talking about the future and what comes next with Project Medtech.
Hello, everybody. I'm Lindsay Deneen, Director of Marketing and Engagement at Project Medtech, and welcome to another episode of the Project Medtech podcast. If we can help you in any way, or you would like to suggest a future guest, you can email us at info@projectmedtech.com. If conversations like this are helpful, that's exactly why we bring people together at our signature events, the Midwest Showcase, the Startup Symposium, and Coming to America. For more on our events that include networking, education, and pitch competitions for startups, check them out at www.projectmedtech.com. We even have sponsorship options if your company is also dedicated to accelerating medical technology to impact patient lives. So reach out today to get involved. The Project Medtech podcast is proudly sponsored by Ward Law. Ward Law Office LLC is a boutique law firm specializing in the practice of patent and trademark law. They are committed to providing inventors, entrepreneurs, and businesses of all types with personal and professional services and are flexible to meet your unique needs. It is their goal to both educate on how to secure valuable patent and trademark protection and to provide high-quality services at rates affordable to independent inventors, startups, and small businesses alike. Without further ado, let's dive in.
From the podcast.
Thanks for having
Absolutely.
us.
So let's, Tony, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Evan. Introduction to yourself, who you are, what you currently do, and maybe just a little bit of your story kind of getting into healthcare.
Sure. So thanks for having me, Dwayne. I know we've been working together for a couple of years now, but I'm Tony. Formal role on the Orlando Health team is Senior Manager of Product Development. Evan and I both sit in a department called Strategic Innovations for Orlando Health, where we basically act as an idea accelerator for the system. So any team member that comes up with an idea or a problem, solution, etc., gets funneled to our department, and we'll help lead the evaluation process, identify if there's any opportunity to build something internally. If there's products that exist out in the world, we can help facilitate partnerships, co-development relationships, etc. And then we have your standard tech transfer, file patents, try to develop those patents and get those licensed out. But I'd say that's probably a smaller facet of our operation. We are pretty unique from a health system standpoint, since our office is actually registered with the FDA to do full med device development in-house, purely from a strategy standpoint to be able to implement a lot of the products that we hear and design internally through Orlando Health, and then pressure test with a few other health systems. A lot of the strategics in the space have moved away from that standard tech transfer licensing model. They want a more de-risked product. They want to see customer adoption. They want to see people actually buy and what those price points are. And so that was the whole impetus of why we decided to embark on the route to get the right certifications to enable this development in-house. And so segueing into that, a lot of my role is leading the med device development in-house. So a lot of the engineering, design and development, design control, documentation, risk management. We have a clinical research team in-house that can do end-to-end IRB clinical studies, whether it's multi-site or just Orlando Health only. But that's a really nice facet to, I'll say, do end-to-end commercialization or end-to-end development and commercialization of some of these products. And then, we both work very closely with our Orlando Health venture team as well. We'll say that's more external focused, that enables the health system to invest in startups that are strategic to Orlando Health. So we'll bring them in, participate in clinical trials, co-development, etc. Historically, it's been in the med device category, so we can offer that strategic value to some of these startups that are navigating the FDA pathways. But I've also touched in pharmaceuticals, digital health, you name it. So really just serve as kind of a facilitator of non-traditional ideas. So long-winded answer. I'll pass it to Evan.
Sweet. Actually, real quick question on this, and then Evan, you can go here. The med device development piece. So Orlando Health is technically a medical device manufacturer, right? Is that kind of what this means, and through this FDA registration?
Yeah, so the FDA has a few different
Uh-huh.
categories of registration. So one is manufacturer. That's your blanket term for I do design development, I do manufacture in house, and I'll go and distribute and manage complaints after the fact. So that's your big strategics like Philips, Medtronic, Boston Sci, etc. And then you have kind of components of each. So there's one thing called a specification developer. So that's the one that's leading the design and development, but isn't ultimately manufacturing. So Orlando Health does not have a manufacturing facility. We just have the resources to design products, test them in house, but then we always need a certified contract manufacturer to actually bring that to market. So think of
Hmm.
injection molders, RF welders, metallurgy, etc. We'll work with those partners that already have those FDA registrations, and then basically bring the product to market together. They produce it, and we go out and commercialize it and implement at Orlando Health. And then so there's a contract manufacturer category as well with the FDA, and then finally complaints or post-market surveillance, like who does a customer go to when there's a problem? How do they report failures, improvements, etc. So we'll also manage that. Just we're not actually
Yeah.
fabricating and shipping out lots of
Yep.
boxes out the door.
Okay, cool. So this is helpful. And then one other additional question before we go to Evan and his background. And so we kind of have the lay of the land there a little bit from Orlando Health. What's your background? Why healthcare? How'd you get to innovation? Like this is the coolest thing about the podcast is, we've done at this point 255 episodes of the podcast or something, or 256. And we get to hear all of these backgrounds and how they've ended up in this like innovation continuum. And it's so interesting. So I'd love to hear, what'd you go to school for? And then how do you stumble on this?
Yeah, yeah. This healthcare health system innovation is definitely a niche market in the broader healthcare design developed spectrum. But I love it personally. I think it's just got the access and resources to do a lot of what strategics have to pay or don't have access to do otherwise. But where I developed this passion, I've been a type 1 diabetic since I've been 1 years old, and so I with a silver lining, got to witness the transition of diabetes medicine kind of change over the course of my life. So I was always doing finger pricks, and insulin shots when I was young. Was one of the first adopters of insulin pumps when they first came out. They're mechanical and programmed with basal rates. So we were always kind of trending. I remember my mom kind of being the first Dexcom pseudo user because she was actually trending all my sugars, much like a continuous glucose monitor does now. And we'd report back with my endocrine. I was going, once a month, sometimes twice a month to track these sugars. And so I kind of fell in love with the way technology significantly improved my life. When CGMs came out and the closed loop pumps came out, my A1C, which not to get into details on, biology, but A1C is kind of an indicator of, for better or less, for lack of a better phrase, how diabetic you are. So, a normal human with a normal pancreas is right in the 4 to 6% range. And then anything above 6 to 10,
Yeah.
your type twos, your type ones kind of fall in that range. And then anything above 10, like you're in really dangerous metabolic territory. When I was first diagnosed, I was at like a 12, and then you kind of trend down as technology gets better. And so right now I operate at a
Wow.
5.5,
Yeah.
which is basically human A1C
Hmm.
normal levels. Um, that's not to say I don't have incredibly low blood sugars and incredibly high fluctuations, but on average, technology is keeping me steady, where in past times it's
Hmm.
been impossible. So the impact that had is what kind of drove me to this passion of wanting to do med device development. It's for similar disease states to see that level of impact that it can have on a patient's life. So that's where the passion came from. But I actually went to school to do diabetes research. So I
Oh,
was originally thinking about the PhD,
yeah.
maybe med MD route, and I went to Ohio State. in the first year I went there, I was joining a diabetes research lab and it got shut down funding wise, which, silver lining again, kind of transitioned me into the device space. But went to school for biomed engineering and
Yeah.
then got my master's in the same, kind of specialized a lot of my career to this point on mechanical electrical design. So I'll say
Yeah.
that's where my focus area is, but I've done plenty of coding. I haven't touched chemistry and I don't plan to, so I'll leave that one out. Pharmaceutical is
Yeah.
not my space, but any hardware, I'll say medical device, I'm pretty
Cool.
comfortable
Awesome.
with.
That's a great background. Love the personal journey too. Great. All right, Evan. Let's hear about your role at Orlando Health, but then also your background, kind of what you got into this, how you got into the space.
Yeah, sounds good. So Evan Gomez, kind of the flip side of what Tony does in this innovation continuum that we built here at Orlando Health. So my responsibility is actually the intake and triaging of all the innovation disclosures we get from around our near 40,000 team members across the Orlando Health regional healthcare system. So we have an open pipeline to anyone. It's not just for physicians. It's not just for administrators or people operating at, call it, higher level positions. It's for the entire system. So whether you're in environmental services, kitchen staff, radiology technicians, other medical technicians, we are a corporate resource for everyone. So whenever we receive an idea, it's my job to sit down with the innovator and really understand what they're looking to do. Oftentimes people don't bring us fully formed solutions. Very rarely do we get approached with even a filed patent application, and even more rare is when somebody approaches us with a company that they may have founded. Oftentimes we get brought a problem. It's, this bugs me every day and I don't know what to do about it, or I have some idea of what to do, but I don't know what a medical device is, or I don't know how to get through the FDA, or even what the FDA really does. So it's my job to sit down with them, break down the problem, look to see what we can solve based on our current resources and bandwidth. And then from there, we look to solve the problem, whether it's internal development, buying a solution that already exists, or potentially developing with someone in industry. So whether it's a large stage company who may be looking to enter into a space, or even an early stage startup who may be developing something and we could be a really nice, call it, clinical partner to them. That's how we try to solve a lot of these needs. So in a lot of that work, I've gained a just tremendous amount of experience and appreciation for what clinicians truly go through and the amount of problem solving that healthcare workers truly have to do on a day-to-day basis. It's really led to some interesting conversations, and that's where things feed nicely into this development pipeline that we've built. So we try and get things in a nice enough package where it is that formal handoff to the actual medical device development process, whether that's IP securement, very early, call it phase 0 work in the medical device PDP landscape, or even just really looking to understand, is a product truly the solution here? Or is this a people problem? Is this process over product? That's the nice little terminology we've kind of coined over time. So that's my core responsibility. And then working alongside Tony, doing venture fund diligence, doing partnership evaluations. A big initiative that Tony and I started a few years ago was something that we coined as the clinical immersion session, which is a curated feedback session where industry can come speak to our hospital staff. Everyone is available to it. As long as it doesn't touch a patient, it's a pretty fair game for an open discussion. And it gives us really good insight into how voice of customer research is actually gathered, what questions oftentimes go unanswered. And it really opens a lot of doors for our clinicians to work with industry. So those are my primary functions
Super
at
cool.
work.
And what about your background? What led you into this? Again, it's like you find that like a lot of people could do anything with it when it comes to med tech or even healthcare innovation. But what kind of drew you to this side of it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was actually terrible at math my entire life. I'm so bad at math. And I never considered what I actually ended up studying, which was biomedical engineering, similar to Tony. But when I was a junior in high school, I read an article on someone who 3D printed his own leg. And that was back when 3D printing was just getting started. People were making tchotchkes, keychains, little things with their name on it. And it was just like, wow, that is insane. How does one even begin to do this kind of work? work, and I had a conversation with a teacher, and it kind of opened this door into, oh yeah, people have to develop every single thing you see in a hospital. Things don't just magically appear. And I'm very fortunate to have been exposed to the medical world very early. My father's a practicing neonatologist and has been a big influence in my life. And, I was able to see some of the struggles he had and, spend time in the hospital as a child and really see how things are actually done by medical professionals. So it got me thinking, I don't necessarily want to be a doctor, but I can be the person who builds things that doctors use. So that's what led me to biomedical engineering in the first place. And I studied that at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in upstate New York. And then while I was in my undergraduate program, I realized pretty quickly, man, I still don't like math. It's not the best thing. So I actually decided to do a program that RPI offered where I was able to get my technical MBA and essentially focus in on new product development and entrepreneurship. And in that process, I actually interned with Orlando Health on the system strategy side and got introduced to the then blooming innovation team that had just started a few years prior. So was able to join full time and work alongside Tony for about 5 years. And
That's awesome.
Here we are.
I love these background stories. They're so great. I have a question about outside in, inside out innovation. But before we get there, our listening base is international, and I'd say 35 to 40% are not U.S. based, and so for those folks, Orlando Health is obviously in Orlando, Florida, which most people I think would know just because of it being like the Disney World studio, or what's the Harry Potter worlds down there as well. I mean, there's like a ton of things down in Orlando. But Orlando Health with 40,000 people, I'm guessing, is not just in Orlando, Florida. So can you talk about the footprint of where Orlando Health is? Because I was Googling it quickly and I swear I saw that Orlando Health supports the Kennedy Space Station launches, which is pretty cool and front of mind based on when we're recording this. But yeah, just maybe a brief overview of where Orlando Health is, what kind of patient population you serve, because you talk about this immersion program you have, and like if I'm a founder and I can get to an urban population, a rural population, and kind of get everything in between, that's pretty attractive. So yeah, I think a system overview would be good.
Sure. Yeah. Orlando Health is the biggest kept secret health system giant, I'd argue, in the nation. We're gonna hit 10 billion in revenue
Wow.
this year as a nonprofit. Yeah, it's kind of mind blowing, but we're still a nonprofit community based health center or system. We're headquartered in Orlando, so we have about 7 flagship hospitals, I'll say, in that respective metropolitan area. But then we've been expanding regionally for about the past 10 years, and so we have the Bayfront Hospital System in Tampa, in St. Petersburg. On the East Coast, we have is that Steward Health, Evan, the East Coast that supports the NASA area, Melbourne, etc. We have hospitals in Jacksonville. We have some south, some north in Lake Mary, Horizon West. So basically cover that Central Florida region pretty heavily. We don't touch as much south. The Miami systems kind of have that well covered, but where we are going is north now. So we have acquired now 6 hospitals in Alabama, which is, Alabama, Orlando Health. It doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, but we're starting to become a Southeast regional system instead of a Florida-based hospital system. And we also have acquisitions in Puerto Rico as well. And that one's actually pretty interesting because a lot of the Puerto Rican people were coming to mainland to get care because there wasn't a lot of resources on the island. And so in order to kind of capture and provide better resources to those patient populations, we kind of built out programs on the Puerto Rican island in a JV partnership with a lot of those hospitals there, Dorado Hospital System being the flagship one over there. So yeah, we're growing every day. Our IT resources are consistently strained trying to implement and integrate all these various Epic or non-Epic EHRs into our single instance. So I like to say we're not the most nimble from an IT standpoint, but we are incredibly nimble and innovative, and I don't think anything scares our leadership team. They really seize opportunities, and so I swear we'll just open up the internal newsletter, and it's a new
Yeah.
hospital we acquired, and how are we going to integrate them and make them feel like they're part of the Orlando Health
Mhm.
community. So it's an exciting system to be a part
Yeah.
of for sure.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I think like as you think about innovation, I mean, you just compare and contrast a a hospital that serves a a metro population versus a very rural population, and the needs are just totally different. But when you're able to, especially as an early stage medtech company, partner with someone who can get you in front of both, it's so valuable. But yeah, so let's talk about outside in versus inside out innovation, and maybe the convergence of the two. Like there's a lot of hospital groups that only do inside out. Then there's quite a few that do both as well. How do you both look at that? I guess when you're kind of comparing the two, is it like you're slanted towards one over the other, or is it like, hey, here's a list of the problems the hospital needs to solve for, here's a couple ideas, here's some, this one's maybe a little bit further along but doesn't hit all the criteria. I would love to know what those internal discussions are, especially considering both of you are kind of coming at it similar yet different. And it doesn't matter who leads this one. Evan, if you want to take it, take it.
Yeah, it's a really good question and something we grapple with regularly. Actually, I think the big thing we have to think about first is actually speed to implementation. That's where that outside in lens becomes really preferable. Is when we're developing internally, there's only a few of us who have the ability to actually take things through the quality management system that we've built out and do all the testing, the development work. We're still hit with a lot of the issues that startups may be facing with their contract manufacturers or supply chain shortages, or changes in the government that may affect industry as a whole. But we are slower than someone who may be laser focused on building one specific item. So that's where that outside in lens becomes really interesting, is how quickly can we get there? How quickly can we get something in the hands of our end users and actually start making an impact to solve a lot of those needs that we may have identified either with them or even just internally through other means. But in a lot of situations, and this is a very common adage, is the company building for themselves or are they building for the clinicians? Because that's something that a lot of companies don't spend enough time on. They don't validate their voice of customer research. They don't truly solve what they're looking to do. And they're thinking, gosh, this is a problem. I'm going to solve it without ever stepping into a hospital. That's why we started those clinical immersion sessions. There's a great story where it's a company spent millions of dollars and years to build this massive piece of equipment that was going to solve every need. It didn't fit through the door because they never thought to actually step into a hospital. So they didn't, really solve that first question. So that's where that inside out really comes into play, where we're actually taking the idea from the end user and we're working with them to identify what is this core challenge? What is the workflow behind it? Are we going to integrate? Are we going to create another barrier? Is this something that's going to add more work to your plate? Because our healthcare workers are overburdened, understaffed. They're operating at the top of their license and it may still not be enough. So if we're going to be creating more headache for them to solve something that may be tangential to what's currently on their mind, it's a product that'll never get adopted. So it really is kind of playing both sides to see how quickly can we get there? How specific do we want to go when we're actually solving this issue? And what resources do we have at our disposal? Because unfortunately, money's always top of mind. So when we're looking at things, cost does play a big factor into it. And we're in the very fortunate situation of being a larger healthcare system that can take risks and build things. And that's what our leadership essentially afforded us the ability to do.
Yeah, I think in summary, yeah, we're never going to identify a clinical issue from outside in. That'll always be inside out. So team members coming to us with their clinical problems, Evan and I are never going to shove down a technology that does not fit in their clinical workflows. But the preference is always outside in if it's solving that problem well and we've identified that problem with a clinical champion. that's always the fastest path. We love the opportunity to get our clinicians added as clinical advisors. I think that's a huge win, where they can help drive and influence that product with the startup, and we can help facilitate bringing that startup in. And then, yeah, landing a big Orlando Health system, that's a pretty good system to have in terms of early market adopters for a startup. And so if you design it with us, you know it's going to be applicable to a number of other giant, nonprofit health systems. So I think there's a lot of mutual benefit for both the startup, for us, but really we only develop internally if there's just nothing out there. It's rare, just given the types of technology and speed at which it's coming today, especially on the software dev front. We do not have a suite of coders inside. Almost always we'll look to the market for digital health software as med device related items because we just can't keep up, and we
Yeah.
don't have that skill set in
Yeah, it
house
makes
either.
total sense. So I got two things here, and the first one is when you're receiving inside out innovation, is the hardest thing to push back on is you talked, Evan, at the very end of yours about money. Is that the hardest point to push on some of these clinician innovators? Because like it's my least favorite thing, right? Like anytime, especially because I'm a scientist, similar to you guys are engineers. I did my master's in medicinal chemistry, so exactly what you hate, Tony. But the small molecule world. But I find myself sometimes talking to innovators and really pushing on, what is, I understand you're going to make patient care better. I understand you want to make the clinician's life easier. What is the economic value for the hospital system? What's the economic value for the payers? What's the economic value for the clinician? Right? Those are the three things you generally have to answer. And then sometimes it's what's the economic value for the patient as well. But I hate talking about that because it feels like it's a reality that it stinks that it is a reality, because it is a business, and it just feels like you're so excited to talk about this innovation, and then you got to bring it back to like, yeah, but you're not really helping anything here when it comes to an economic value. So I'd be curious, is that your least favorite, or is there something else that you kind of hate talking about as well with some of these innovators?
I'll let Evan speak to actually delivering the news of telling them their baby's ugly. But what I can speak to anecdotally is some frustrations I've had, not with Orlando Health in general, and Orlando Health's acting as a business, but
As a
it's
whole, right?
healthcare as a concept. Yeah, exactly. It's the amount of times we've seen incredible technology driving amazing impact for patients or clinicians or whatever it may be, but shot down from the operational leaders because it, hits the bottom line too hard, and you can't equate cost savings to hard savings. Or the even worse one is you're cannibalizing revenue that is actively reimbursed, and that procedure may be worse for the patient, and they may get 5 or 6 of these procedures, and you may reduce it to one with this new technology. You're cannibalizing tens of thousands of reimbursement dollars that is again hitting the bottom line for that hospital. And so there's been a lot of technology that has not made it past the willingness to buy, or trying to figure out a better solution of how to still capture that revenue without sacrificing, some of the margin that the hospital's facing. It's a brutal truth, and so we put a lot of emphasis on that piece of the puzzle, is talking to CFOs and operational leaders on willingness to buy, making sure that what we are developing or working with a startup on is something that would be purchased down the line. Because rarely, and I won't say it doesn't happen, but rarely are physicians the one actually driving forward whether or not solution gets through the door. If they're a high profile physician, they probably have some pull and they can get it. But I'll say your prototypical physician that, doesn't have as much uh, rapport with their name. CFO, if they see any sort of bottom line hit, it's probably getting shut down.
Yeah, no, Evan, I want you to add to this, but like I couldn't agree more with this. Like the you have to have a clinician champion, but the role of a clinician champion nowadays to get a new product approved is just it's not what it used to be, right? Like even Sean McGibbon from our team, who ran hospitals for 20 years, used to say, "Hey, yeah, if the uh, neurosurgeon, the orthopedic, or the structural heart surgeon came in my door and said they want a new technology, sure thing, sounds good, whatever you need, right? Just keep doing your procedures." But nowadays, it's like that's not necessarily the case. It's really interesting. I'll have one more story to add, but Evan, I want you to go first here before I talk about it.
Yeah, no, it's a really, really good question. And where Tony spoke a lot too is on the formed innovation side, where it's a product already exists and we have to start thinking about a lot of those downstream things. And it's a shame, but it's the reality we play in. And fortunately, that is where a lot of that delivery actually happens. We're all playing in the same system here. It's not us versus you. It's not your idea is bad. It's, hey, within the constraints that we are currently dealing with, this product doesn't make the most sense at this time. We don't flat out say no to a concept. We have a phrase we like to use called off the horizon, where it just may not make sense right now. But the industry is ever changing. New technologies, new products, things are being developed every single day and constantly hitting the FDA's desk and going out for approval. So we do very often actually have situations where people will bring us a need. 6 months down the line, we find this incredible product that does exactly that just got FDA approval a week ago. And it's like, wow, that's amazing. That's the best case scenario. But when it comes to delivering that, call it unfortunate news that their project wasn't selected or their idea didn't essentially match a lot of the criteria that we set, it's all about empathetic delivery. I never spend that first meeting shooting down a concept. I never voice my concerns in that first one. I always let people just really explain what they're trying to talk about, tell me their whole story, who they're working for, all the 9 yards that is going to help this conversation in the future if it does unfortunately fall to a no. But when it is a no, again, it's focusing more on the issues at hand. It's depersonalizing why we didn't move forward with this. And everyone's an adult. Most people understand and take it very graciously. And oftentimes it's a learning experience for them to understand why or why not things are moved forward, or maybe it's, not chosen just at that single moment in time. But it's something you get used to. It's not the most fun part of the job, but I think having that good rapport with our innovators actually breeds better innovations, because then they start asking those questions for us. It's, let me take a second and think about this. If I look at a shelf with 10 other products that do functionally the same thing, maybe I'm not going to come up with something that I know already exists, and I'm going to go for something a little more niche or put a little more thoughts into differentiating features on the front end, and then bring it to the innovations team to really explore how we could potentially protect and then move forward with these concepts. So we're trying to build smarter, better, more forward-thinking innovators, and people talk. Innovation goes a long way. It truly is an ecosystem that is built. And as more and more people find out who we are and what they offer, they tell their coworkers. And then all of a sudden we're reaching corners that we never once put tendrils to.
I love it. This that leads perfectly in my next question, but there was two things I wanted to bring up based on both of your responses. Most recently, Evan, you're kind of talking about, yeah, sometimes it's just not the right time right now. So I had to look back and see when I did the episode, but I had Lance Black on the podcast, and he used to be at Texas Medical Center for Innovation, and now I think he's at Texas A&M. He does some different things. He was episode 4 of the Project Medtech podcast. So this episode got released in June of 2020. But he talked about being a historian of the problem. And the reason he talked about that is because oftentimes people will innovate things to solve a problem, and it's just not the right time. And so people will go back. And so he said, when you're identifying a problem, go back and look at how it was attempted to be solved in the past, because you might be able to make an adaptation to one way and now pull that forward and be there. And so his example he gave was another company that I don't think was on the podcast. They were on the podcast. This would have been April of 2021. We had a company called Memic on the podcast. And I think they've rebranded their company. They've went on to be super successful. They either IPO'd or they exited. But they were talking on the podcast. They were doing robotic hysterectomies without making incisions. They were doing it vaginally. And so, really cool product. But the whole idea was you went from an open surgery to minimally invasive to now no incisions. It was super interesting and something that he was like, they used to do hysterectomies all the time that way. And so that was his whole point, though. It was like a full circle moment of being a historian of the problem, going back and looking at something and saying, well, if I combine it now with our new techniques, can we go back to what was the gold standard? I mean, it's just, it was a fascinating conversation. He talked a little bit about how, the smaller the incision, the better the surgery. And if you can make no incision, that's the best possible way to do it. And so it just, again, you brought this up about it might just not be right now. So much of this thing is on timing. The other piece, Tony, you alluded to this. When we did our Coming to America event in Copenhagen last year, we spent 2.5 hours on explaining the US healthcare system to all the innovators over there. And that is when sometimes like we are really good at innovation. And we have some of the best possible healthcare you can have, but it doesn't mean we don't have issues. And I think when you explain the model to them, they have so many questions because they're used to a totally different system. It's a single payer healthcare system. And so, and even one thing we noticed after the first day, we were kind of sitting around. It was myself, Sean, who I already mentioned on the podcast, and our chief operating officer, Aaron. And we were sitting there and we were talking, even the innovations looked a little different, right? There were a couple innovations there where they were built where there was clearly someone who cares about the total patient care. And you can tell that product is awesome. I don't know who pays for it in the US. It's definitely not the hospital. It's definitely not the insurance company. And so you're in this like weird no man's land, And so you start to realize how complex the systems are when you are over there and you're kind of talking to everyone about it. So I wanted to share that story because it really affirms what you were talking about. The next question is, I'm guessing Orlando Health uses this robust innovation arm to recruit clinicians, specific kinds of clinicians. How do you, one, is that the case? I'm guessing it is. But two, how do you breed that culture of innovation and from the inside out to where a clinician's like, hey, boy, this is a problem. I'm going to submit about this. But then also, how do you get them to get involved in all the other stuff though? Right? Like you're talking about this clinical immersion program where it's like, hey, if I'm a company in Ohio, I want to reach out to Orlando Health and you can run this program for me at a cost, right? To so that I can go meet clinicians. You still have to have clinician buy-in because I want good advice. I don't want them to just brush me off and be like, yeah, and tell me what I want to hear. So how do you breed that culture? And it probably comes from both of you. And I think Evan, you started last time or Tony did? Maybe no, Evan, you start on this one and we'll let Tony fill in.
That is a fantastic question. And to the podcast listeners, Tony and I were smiling that whole time. It is a recruiting tool. That is something that they use heavily actually in the physician recruitment. A lot of times innovation is very gated behind the ivory gates of, the large academic medical centers where IP is tightly owned and controlled by the organization. And people are very afraid to share their ideas for the fear that it's going to get away from them and they're going to lose control and potentially lose out. So one thing that we spend a lot of our time on is actually educating our innovators on intellectual property in general And a big focus area for our department, and again, fortunately from leadership, we're granted the opportunity to let innovators really run with how they want to work with their IP. If they want us to use our resources and develop with them, then they approach our department and we go hand in hand and make things happen. But if they want to run with it themselves, that's something that they're afforded the ability to do. They're able to do that. They're able to approach industry, start their own companies, do the work that they want to do. So it doesn't stifle innovation out of fear of having the idea go away from them and potentially be stolen, which is a big concern for a lot of especially high value and even younger clinicians who may not be able or aware of what they're able to truly do and how industry actually works. But to your question of, how does it breed? How do all of those call it innovation networks get broader, bigger? People talk. We find who our champions are, and they're oftentimes our subject matter experts. We're very fortunate to work with some really, really bright clinicians, and when we get something in cardiology, we know who to go to. We have something in cancer, we know who to go to. All the different service lines that we have, we try and identify those champions and create a nice little Rolodex for everyone that we can call when something comes in. So when a clinical immersion session comes in, when a venture deal comes in, when a new idea comes in that we need to validate with external users, again, we just reference those SMEs that we've built up over time. And then again, they're speaking to other people. And then they're like, gosh, that's a great idea. I want to start working with industry. And then all of a sudden we have a nice little pocket of innovation that's starting to breed. People start thinking about new products to develop, new ways to start thinking about things. And sometimes these innovations even result in procedural changes where it's not something device focused or something physical and tangible. It's much more around thought leadership and changing entire paradigms of medicine and how things are actually done. And we're very fortunate to see this pop up right in front of our eyes. And a few of our innovations are paradigm shifts and have resulted in some really interesting changes in how medicine is actually delivered. But very interested to hear how Tony wants to answer this question as well.
A lot of similar thoughts. I echo the smile because while the work that we do is super cool, we have amazing access to clinicians, we can build novel devices or invest in them. I bring back the concept of why I brought up we're a $10 billion health system, nonprofit. So to trigger our nonprofit status, we would have to make $1 billion a year. So we are not the revenue generators for the system. We are what I like to say an HR recruitment and retention tool for our employees and more prominently, high profile physicians. So we've poached tons of physicians to come work with us because of the resources and programs we have, whether it be clinical research, maybe they're really novel and innovative and work with industry already and want to continue doing that. Maybe they want to just flex that creative innovation arm. A lot of the times they just like to have fun with us. I know a big part of Evan's role again is telling people, hey, this product exists, or I don't recommend moving forward for XYZ reasons. That's a huge value add for them because without this program telling them that, they're going to go out and spend a bunch of dollars themselves to figure out that same solution. So all of our resources are offered in kind. And whether or not we move forward with a project, we're still providing our team members some level of value. And for the ones that do move forward, again, it's a way to keep them kind of happy, keep them at bay, and get them out of their mundane clinical duties. And I definitely won't lie. We have taken on projects that I think would otherwise get passed on, but there's a prominent person at the table that may generate $150 or $150 million in revenue for the system from surgeries. So yeah, let's build this little seed startup on the side. So it's not uncommon, but we do our best to pick the cream of the crop solutions, but a lot of the times we are strategic to the health system mission as well.
Awesome. All right, I have 2 questions in closing. Tony, you'll lead off here. I'm going to come back to you for the second question because I don't give, for the people who are listening to the podcast, I don't give any of my guests preloaded questions. So they really don't know what I'm going to ask. And generally, it's pretty easy because it's conversational. But the last 2 questions, one of them can be somewhat difficult because it might be hard to pick. But the first question is for someone about to innovate. Um, they're thinking of a product, they're kind of going through this, or an international company that's already kind of done stuff but looking to come to the US market. What's one thing they need to know? And you've given a whole podcast worth, but if you could narrow it down to one piece of advice. And the second question that you're not going to answer yet, Tony, that I'll come back to, is for someone who's interested in innovation entrepreneurship, what's your best book recommendation? So answer the first question. We'll kick the next one to Evan, and then we'll come back to you for the book and go back to Evan for his book.
Yeah, I'm glad I
Yeah,
got to
you
think
got
about the
time.
book
You
one.
got Evan's answer.
Appreciate
Yeah.
the ping pong. So international company coming to the US, my biggest recommendation, just operating from a ventures standpoint, you need a US presence if you want to be here. You need somewhere for US investors to invest in a US company so that they don't have foreign tax documents and strange returns on an annual basis. We've made foreign investments, and it's proven to be an enormous administrative burden to manage those from afar. We can't have meetings with them. We have to fly overseas to go and see what they're up to. So it's a simple administrative, well, it's not simple from a legal standpoint, but it will enable you to get better access to US investors that might even just draw a line in the sand and say, we don't touch foreign. Again, we're a little bit unique. We don't back down from a challenge that often, but I think we may have some regrets. A few of them.
I love it.
So, that'd be my first piece of advice. A second, if you can find a hospital system that works with you and adapts it, make sure it fits in the healthcare ecosystem, and you have the reimbursement figured out. I'd say that's the biggest second piece. I think FDA translates well to the CE mark. Actually, CE mark is actually harder to do, so I don't think there's worry from there. But being able to utilize, if you are FDA or CE approved, real world evidence to then apply for your FDA application and start to figure out the sales market inside the US. Don't expect the sales cycle to be anything shorter than 12 months. It's incredibly arduous and challenging. So, yeah, I would say just be prepared for long timelines and try to enable yourself to have as much US investor base, especially health system strategics like ourselves, to invest in you if the product's promising.
Evan.
The biggest piece of advice I would offer, and this actually applies to both international and US based companies, you speak to one hospital system, you speak to one hospital system. Do not take preconceived notions from one specific either healthcare individual or a system as law. Things change. Everyone practices medicine different. That's why it's the art of medicine. So really looking to understand and solve for a lot of the challenges that the various customer bases that you're looking to tap into have is going to make you, one, stronger as a startup, and two, it's going to open a lot of doors. Because if you try and move forward under assumptions that one customer gave you, you could be limiting the potential for your product. So speak to everyone you can. Find those champions. Like Tony was saying, if there's someone in your backyard that wants to work with you, take it, run with it, find other people. Because the worst thing that someone can do is build in a vacuum and bring forward a solution that not a lot of people want to broadly adopt.
Yeah, Evan, I double down on that, and while you're thinking of your book, because we just saw the group. It was announced yesterday, and from a timestamp perspective, we're recording this April 14th. So depending on when this release, people are like, well, that wasn't yesterday, Dwayne. But Amplitude Vascular Systems was just acquired by Boston Scientific yesterday. And the reason I mention this is because it's a Michigan-based company out of U of M. A lot of investors from the Michigan ecosystem. We're having our Midwest Showcase there in a month in Michigan, so it's at top of mind. But they were a pre-FDA clearance exit. They focused hard on clinical data. They didn't worry about, how many hospitals they could get into their sales pipeline. They just focused on that. Boston Scientific saw the value and said, cool, we can put this into our sales machine and compete against, probably Shockwave Medical, which I think is what this technology goes after. But that's my point is doubling down, Evan, on what you're saying, which is, you know, if you can find a partner, hold on to that, because the likelihood that you need to go full scale commercial with this, you can, but the longer you can delay that decision to have to do that, the better. So I love the advice. Who's ready with their book recommendation?
All right,
Okay,
I'm
all right, let's
ready.
hear it.
I'll give two that I guess influenced my journey. The more engineering, like med device one, I read this decades ago, is the Stanford Biodesign kind of
Mm,
Bible, essentially walking through every step of the way of building a med device company. I think that's just should be in anyone's library in
yep.
this space. Still have it on my bookshelf. I don't pull it out. I just Google things these days, but
Let
I
us
remember
know.
parts of it. Uh, the other one that I'm an engineer at heart, and I hate sales. But the book that actually probably had the biggest impact, both on kind of approaching everyday corporate world, but also personal life as well, is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. It's really got the kind of how to be a good salesperson lens, but why I like it is it gives you kind of tips and strategies from a psychology standpoint of what humans look for in conversation, especially saying, using people's first name in the middle of a sentence. Like that's their favorite word is their first name. And so being able to approach conversations, you might have the best technology in the world, but if you can't pitch on it, you're not going to win an investor. You're not going to win an acquirer at the end of the day. You have to tell the story. And so I think that book is hugely pivotal in terms of how you approach those
Yeah, Tony,
conversations.
it's this whole shelf right here where this old picture of me and my wife and this Jameson candle is. This is all about psychology and how people make decisions. A lot of it is Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky's work, which if you haven't read their stuff, it's excellent. But then there's some other good ones in there too from some other folks. And I've spent a lot of time reading that because I think it's just tremendously helpful. To your point, it's not just even in business. It's just like business and personal life. It's just really solid. So, Evan.
Yeah, my book recommendation is one that I was actually told to read for one of my entrepreneurship classes. It's Crossing the Chasm by
I've read that
Jeffrey
one.
Moore. That is a very common recommendation for many entrepreneurs across any industry. But I think it really just shows how to start thinking about where you want to go with your product. And the fact that it's very easy to build, that's not the hard part. The hard part is scale. It's truly scaling and innovation, especially in healthcare, where everything is pushed up to 11, timelines, costs, potential reimbursement paths, and understanding how you want to take your concept from benchtop all the way to use in multiple systems. It's good questions, and it's a great book to start thinking about how you're going to
Love
attack
it.
that problem.
Awesome. Tony, Evan, thanks so much for doing this. We'll have links to your LinkedIn profiles in the show notes. We'll have links to Orlando Health's innovation team in the show notes as well. Hang on for 1 minute. We'll chat offline, but thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, much
Yep.
appreciated, Dwayne. It was a
Awesome.
blast.
Hi, I'm Freddie Coffey, Director of Marketing at Jumpstart. The Project Medtech podcast is proudly sponsored by Jumpstart Inc. Jumpstart's Trailblazer Accelerator helps Ohio's most innovative early-stage health tech startups fast-track their growth with tailored advising from serial entrepreneurs, non-dilutive funding to fuel their journey, and unrivaled access to a network of experts, resources, and investment opportunities. Whether it's improving patient outcomes, advancing digital health, or reimagining care delivery, Jumpstart provides the high-impact services and critical resources to bring big ideas to life. Learn more at jumpstartinc.org/startups.
Thank you for listening. At our core, we at Project Medtech are networkers, educators, and consultants. We meet you where you are to bring value and to create impact. We care deeply about helping medtech companies succeed right from the start, through to exit, by providing consulting and fractional services, hosting impactful industry events, and of course, sharing incredible guest insights like the ones you heard today through our podcast. Please reach out at any time if we can be of assistance. Check out our website at www.projectmedtech.com or email us at info@projectmedtech.com.